Hello and welcome. I'm really pleased this evening we have some inspiring leaders. Dr. Nola Ishmael, OBE, Jacynth Ivey, MBE, Jennifer Pearson, and Beverley Stevens. This reflection marks a significant moment to acknowledge the decades during which the progress of BME staff, in those days we used to say Black and minority ethnic, and service users became a core focus within healthcare. These formative years were marked by creativity, intensity, and challenge, as professionals from all backgrounds worked to embed equality into everyday professional practice. Among the pioneering efforts, RCN Connect, that's the Royal College of Nursing, Connect, played a vital role and remains a celebrated part of this journey. The establishment of the Ethnic Diverse Nursing Association in Birmingham was a milestone shaped by both personal and professional challenges. It represented a determined effort to create a platform for ethnic diversity within the nursing profession. As we look back on the impact of RCN Connect, it is important to consider how it addressed key issues such as underrepresentation, service improvement, and workforce equality. The legacy of these initiatives continue to inform current debates on effective equity and inclusion policies, workforce development, leadership progression, and community engagement. Now, 25 years on, we reflect on the key lessons from this history, how they shape the profession, and how they can influence and adapt to meet future workforce challenges and provide high quality care for patients and communities throughout the health and social care system. I'd now like to ask Dr. Nola Ishmael to provide us with some reflections, particularly from Dame Sarah Mullally's keynote address. And this was from the Mary Seacole Bicentenary celebrations hosted by Guy's and St. Thomas, London South Bank University, and it was a major exhibition, the first exhibition of its type at the Florence Nightingale, featuring Mary Seacole, led by a Mr. Alex Atwell, and the leadership team of Guy's and St. Thomas, at that time headed by former chairman Patricia Mowbray. Over to you, Dr. Nola.
Thank you, Rudy, and good evening to all who have joined us. This was a unique opportunity to look back over a period of time when the NHS was doing its best to be seen as a good employer, recognizing that there had been failures and absolute lack of, I suppose we should say, inclusion. This was a period 25 years ago when I worked at the Department of Health and had ethnic health as one of my subjects in my portfolio of subjects. Looking back, I recall regularly talking to people, trying to get messages across. Indeed, rereading the speech and, and the things that went on gave me a sense of the uphill struggle that laid before us. Let me talk about Dame Sarah Malali's speech to the celebration and the bicentenary of Mary Seacole. Sarah pointed out that she had come to London at the age of 18 from her sheltered location in Surrey, and it was the first time as a student nurse she had to deal with Black and ethnic people and the approaches she took. Her speech covered a plethora of challenges that she encountered and how she dealt with them and how she learned to bring out the best in people. Her speech said, "We have a lot to be grateful for in the NHS to people who had traveled to work from their home country to work in this country." That was her first acknowledgement. She talked about how fascinated she was and what she encountered among her staff as she progressed in her upward climb towards promotion. She talked about the Jamaican nurses who were so skilled at what they do and how they helped her. But when opportunities to apply for higher paid jobs came and she tried to encourage them to apply for them, the answer was no. Bringing a clear understanding that they didn't want to dare to go and apply for the job and be rejected. And that's the story of BME nurses. They had passed the same exams. They had got as far as they could as staff nurses. But when it came to applying for higher posts, they were reluctant. That told her something about whether or not she should focus on how people were rejected, ignored, or encouraged. And she made a point of encouraging her staff. Her speech, if you like, is a timeline of how Black and ethnic nurses were treated in the NHS from the get-go. You're good at what you do, but not good enough to be promoted to highest levels. As I read this speech, I was like, more people should see this speech and understand the awkward element of the workforce and the workplace that we endured. And it was only 25 years ago, but it's still, I think, more or less nearly the same. I stand to be corrected, of course. Dame Sarah's speech went on to talk about the challenges of the workplace and the various people that were making a stand to remind people to help and support and encourage the ME staff. She talked about Trevor Phillips and how his, if you like, his mountain of getting there, people getting along and not only getting up the ladder, but being supported to be there. And he was then the head of the Commission for Equal, may I get it right? He was the head of the Ethnic Commission. Rudy, you can help me with, you can remember.
Yeah, so it's
his
the
job.
Human Rights Commission.
And
But
yes,
you're close enough. You're close enough.
yeah. So his view was that we helped to build, but nobody accord us the credit of how we do and the various things that went on. She talked about the nursing press and how they started to recognize people and what they were too awkward to talk about before, how the nursing standards started to highlight the progress of staff, and the RCN with establishing RCN Connect. This speech that she made compared to how Mary Seacole made an effort to help the soldiers in the Crimea War. Despite the difficulties, she was determined to help. And in spite of all she suffered, she reached out to injured soldiers, and hence her history today stands bright and tall. We need to recognize our history too. Every nurse has a history of contribution. Every midwife has a story of the babies they delivered safely and caringly. And we need to be reminded that they didn't do it because somebody said you should. They did it because they wanted to. Mary Seacole had a similar because she wanted to. I just want to end with what Sarah said. She made a comment with the global challenge that was then enveloping nursing recruitment, with trained nurses coming from Caribbean, Africa, Philippines, and elsewhere, and not being given equal pay, even though they had been nurses in their country. And she went on to say the documentation and the policies that we created, such as Getting On Against the Odds, a document that was very dear to my heart. I remember participating in its development, shone a light on how the individual nurses felt as they were being treated. She looked at the qualities that we look for in our nurses: caring and self-awareness, empathy and honesty, integrity. And she reinforced those are the things that nurses do and continue to do. She identified that when she came into post, there were very few Black and ethnic nurses at a leadership level, which is true. There was myself and maybe 3 or 4 others. And she went on to name those that had risen and given the visibility that was their due. People like Dame Caroline Davis, people like Rosalind Steele, the late Rosalind Steele, who was at our Royal College of Midwives, Elizabeth Anyuanyu, who is now a very potent figure in today's world. She talked about Janet Grant, Mary Clark, Amy Davis, Leslie Watson Jury, and lastly myself. Those were the people who were standing up and trying hard. She hoped that the number would increase. I'd like to think it has increased, but I'm not sure. So now, moving on to the speech I gave at RCN Connect. This was the keynote speech that was going to celebrate the work that we had achieved with the Royal College of Nursing. And believe me, we're pleased how far we've come. This was no mean effort. Rudy Fish had the mantle, and boy, did he use it. He made it a point of determination to mention, to determine how we would go forward. I'd like to think that this work led to the increase of representatives in the RCN. Black and ethnic minority representatives were multiplied over and over again. To this day now, we have so many more. But prior to RCN Connect, you could have a party in the room with two people. Let me tell you a little bit about some of the things I talked about in that speech. And I have to say, I don't know if it's good to look back that far. I don't know if you write or do something and then 25 years later you go look at it and you thought, I said that, but I did. I talk about the reflection and the recall when people weren't sure how to address us. Whether saying BME or Black and Ethnic would upset people. And as for writing it down, and I recall asking, you remember when they were walking towards equal opportunity? Oh, for goodness sake, how many years does it take to walk towards, to move forward to? Nothing was done immediately. It was forever moving forward, but never getting there. Is it there today? We shall see. We had a document. Everybody remembers the NHS plan of 2000 with the promises, the investment in the education of nurses, the education of management, the toleration, the application of the Race Relations Act. Somehow it never seemed to be applied unless somebody died or was harmed. That was a point that you had to make it happen. It didn't flow. Some of the things I talked about was the various documents that came out of the department, tackling racial harassment, positively diverse work, improving working lives. I'll say over the period, the different governments were forever trying with their documents to make it look like they were a good employer. Somehow the publicity was needed. Success, I don't know if it happened. The nursing strategy, making a difference. Oh, wow. They tried so hard. It had 8 chapters, and 8 people were appointed to take through each chapter. And sometimes when they look at what they said they would do, there was nothing about BME people or services for BME people. So there were gaps, but they were determined to make it work. We were busy looking at awards to reward people for the work that they did. And then there was the Mary Seacole Award that highlighted that then, at the time, there were about 11, 12 people who had achieved that award and made good progress in their careers and the benefits of it. 25 years ago, I said in that speech that if we look back 12 years from then, what would we say? What would we see? Would we see that they're charged with the responsibility, that people were charged with the responsibility to make it better for future generations of BME staff? Would we see that? Would we see the RCN leading as the result of the work of RCN Connect and making sure that it, as an organization, held the flag of increasing and promoting people, helping others to gain? And what would it look like? That was in 2015. What would it look like? Well, 10 years later, we are added. What does it look like today? Finally, RCN Connect finished with a leading the change period. Hey, it was good work. Rudy, you did a great job. The mapping of the brief and making sure that the It went from West Midlands nationally to move forward. How did it work, and how did we use our networks? We worked hard. We tried harder. My question now, since that period, since the time of RCN Connect and various legislation and policies, what does it feel like in today's NHS? How much better is it? How much stronger is it? And where are the bright leaders of today? I wait to hear. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Nola, for that. And just to add to the point you made about your speech relating to leading the change, that model developed with RCN Connect was based on the communities of practice model. And
Yes.
because of the RCN leadership program at the time, we're pushing that very strongly. So I ran workshops, not just in London, but in Newcastle, Glasgow, Belfast, Mid Wales. So that model works with all people, I believe.
Yeah.
If you're
Yes,
willing
indeed.
to work as a team, reach a consensus so you can make decisions.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for that now. So Nola, I'm going to put you on the spot now with our panel members who all know you well as the inspiring leader that you are and you were then. So I'm going to start with Jacynth Ivey and just going to ask each just to give you a simple question. Jacynth, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rudy. Nola, it's wonderful to see you this evening. And thank you for presenting us with that reflection. And one of the things that you said, which struck me, you kind of asked a question, and I'm assuming it was a rhetorical question, but I'd love to just hear your views. When you said that you referred to the NHS plan with all of its promises. As well as the plethora of documents and policies that you talked about. And you said at that time they probably weren't far-reaching enough. With all of your wisdom, you're a pioneer in this field, and with all of your wisdom, what would you have liked to have seen that would have really helped us to get further than perhaps we are now?
Thank you, Jacynth. Oh, let me just roll back the memory place. When Alan Milburn, who was then the Secretary of State for Health, wrote the NHS plan in 2000, everybody treated it as a Bible.
That's right.
We were going to make it happen. Out of it came a plethora of documents and systems to move forward. What I wanted to see more of, more than rhetoric, more than promises, was recognition that we contribute to the NHS care significantly. We were the ones who were doing the twilight services, the late evening insulins, the early morning watches for community patients. I wanted to see recognition of those unsung heroes that was making it work. I remember when I was asked to write a speech for Alan Milburn, who was giving a speech on one of the occasions, I wrote in the speech that BME staff were the backbone of the NHS. And I still believe they are. So what I would like to see more of recognition and reward. When the development of staff started and it was pitched at staff who were like band 7 and above, what about the foot soldiers? Who's going to help them move up and move on? Who's will educate them? I had a conversation that was very terse and tense with one of the, I won't name her, leaders of the NHS. And she asked me, why was I grumbling about this? And I told her, for this reason. Everybody else gets a program of education that moves them on positively. But for BME people, it's breakthrough. Why do we have to break through anything to progress? Why couldn't it be named something like development or move on? Why does it have to be labeled in a way as though you're black, so you're helpless? No, it's the system. So yes, Jacynth, I would have liked to have seen less of the labeling and more of the recognition. But that's me. That was my lone voice. But I wasn't afraid to stand up and challenge them. That was the thing. There was no blueprint for me when I was there. So I had to say to people, I once said to one of the ministers, the late Tessa Joel, do you want the truth or you want the raw of truth? And she, bless her heart, said, Mrs. Ishmael, I know you can give me the raw and the candid truth. And I told her. So courage, confidence, and facts, not feelings. Facts about how things are. I learned to listen and not make it emotional. I refuse to emote.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for that, Jacynth. I'd now like to ask Jennifer Pearson to ask her question to Nola.
Hi there, Nola. Delighted to see you again. My goodness. I think for the listeners, I don't think they realise how lucky they are to have you in the room and your words of wisdom. So I'm still writing things down that you're saying this evening. But my question is, you talked about how hard we worked and how hard we tried. And then you wanted to know how much stronger the NHS is. But I think you are, well, I know that you're well aware that there is the Nola Ishmael Chief Nursing Officer network that currently operates and advises the Chief Nursing Officer. What are your thoughts with the fact that we still have to have such a network?
Interesting, I like that. Yeah. 2003, we created the advisory group for cerebral malaria at the time. Why do we still need it? Because we are pigeonholed. We're not, it's not our fault. It is where they've placed us. But we mustn't knock it because it's an opportunity to hear and allow our voices to be heard and to comment and inform at a high level. Otherwise, apart from random articles and people's perception, we wouldn't have the chance to say to the chief nurse, this is what the groundwork is. This is what is being said at her local communities. Who else would work hard and advise about sickle cell if we didn't, and the Sickle Cell Society and all those sickle cell nurses make the point to get information across. Who else would talk about the number of people who need specific care that only we can give? Who else would use the church services as a background to bring health messages to our people? So our task is to not only inform, but to continue to bring what is really happening within our communities to the notice of those who make the decisions. So it's moved from where it started now to be a forum that can, if we are doing it right, advise Parliament, advise ministers. So we haven't got anything else to put in its place, and we are not going to risk losing what we've got. So we'll continue until some bright spark of the X generation and the Z generation comes up with something better. We're looking to hope that our new and informed and digitally educated Black nurses can bring something to the table too. Because you need those who follow on to share their experiences. So let's make them part of our informed group of people.
Thank you for that, Jennifer.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a great answer. And the legacy for Nola, you know, it's named after you. The group is now the Nola Ishmael Chief Nursing Officer Strategic Advisory Group.
Thank you.
That's fantastic.
Thank you.
And it's great to see that what will be the generational progression. Because there will always be people who want to know, well, who was Dr. Nola Ishmael? What did he do? And they're going to be the bright ones and say,
yes,
I will now do it better.
Yeah, absolutely. Please. Yes.
Exactly what we want.
Yes.
Thanks for that, Jennifer. Beverley Stevens.
Nola, my question to you, it's a comment and hopefully there's a question within it, is about, you know, the work that yourself and some of the people that you named earlier, the trailblazers, as we need to call you. I wonder whether you are, at that time, whether you had any kind of trajectory around, and this is really bold of me to say this, about where we might be, you know, where the work that you, the trailblazers colleagues did at the time, where did you think you might be and by when? Was there any kind of thought around, you know, where you wanted to take nurse leadership? And also, let me just bring in the patient here. Yeah. For me, it's where I'm at, and Rudy knows this, where I'm at in my trajectory, very much about empowering and growing a community that understands its rights and what care it can expect, and to be nursed by people who look like them. That's me. That's where I'm at, Nola.
Okay, thank you.
You know,
lovely.
So where are you on at that time? Where did you think we might be 25 years ago? What was the trajectory? What did it look like?
Okay, thank you, Beverly. Oh, that's a deep one. That's very dimensional.
That's Beverly. That is
I didn't have a plan, but I knew I had to share what I knew. So without asking anyone, I started a shadowing and mentoring group, if you remember. People were people came into the Department of Health and shadowed me for some for days and some for weeks. My intention was not to go up the ladder and pull it up behind me, but to pull and reach back. And the number of people over the years I was in the department, 10 years, I think is a good cadre of people who've gone on. I remember talking to a couple of people who had come to chat with me, and they were applying for jobs. And I spent part of that day going through interview skills and whatever, and helping them. And 9 times out of 10, they got the job. And I remember them talking among themselves, and one said to the other, "Have you been Nola'd?" My trajectory, it was that I had got there by somebody asked if it was fluke, but it wasn't. I promise you, it was deep studying and daring, daring to do, daring to say, I can do this. I can do this. I can lead this. I can developing confidence that was inside rather than out there. Nobody ever said, "Come on, let me show you." Nobody ever said, "Nola, can I mentor you?" I wish they had. But I decided I would mentor people. I would help people to go to the next level. And I would send out messages that says, "Come and spend some time with me. See how it happens at the top. Hear what ministers do. See how the policies develop and the feedback." So my trajectory for all those trailblazers that you mentioned, Bev, and all the empowerment was not to talk the job, but to show and develop and encourage. And I can tell you, on any good day, the number of telephone calls I would get at the department from people in the NHS telling me about a problem that had emerged, had come up, and asking, what do? I would say, get a pen and a piece of paper. And I would give them bullet points as to what. One particular head of nursing called me one afternoon and said, "Nola, I've been told not to come to work on Monday," this was the weekend, "because they're considering my job." And I said, "Who told you this?" My manager. I said, "Okay, this is what you should do. Pretend you didn't hear her. And and she said, "Monday there's a study day and they told me not to come." I said, "Well, my advice is pretend you didn't hear that. Plant yourself in the front row of the seat of the room and carry on as if she hadn't spoken." But she said I mustn't come. I said, "You didn't listen to me." I said, plant yourself in the middle of the front row and participate in this. She has no right to tell you when to come and go and can't tell you why she's doing it because somebody said you shouted. So part of us is to know when to walk on and walk away or say, make me. Or there are procedures and policies people have to adhere to before they get all grandiose as though they're the slave master and you must obey. And she did just what I said, and she never heard another word. So what was that called? Was that defiance? No. It was, I have rights too. And I will be treated equally. Could you imagine saying that to somebody else of another color? No. So don't fight, don't aggress, don't pretend it's, and what you're going to do when I don't do it. Standing up for yourself, standing your ground. The trailblazers that we talked about, each has a story, and they're the ones who were in those years of the last quarter of a century was trying to change things and says, come along. And they were pulling people and helping people. But it takes more than wanting to. You need resources, you need recognition, you need encouragement. Oh God, you need sleep. I tell you, I went through, there were times when I would hear myself say, if I can get to bed before the birds start to sing, I can get 2 hours. If I can get to sleep before the birds start to sing, because I had a paper to write, you see, and nothing was going to stop me writing that paper. And if I didn't, it would look as though I couldn't handle it. So handle it I did. Right. If I can get to sleep before the birds start to sing, I'll be all right. So yes, it isn't easy. Leadership is not imitation. It calls for energy. It calls for concentration, and it calls for clarity and understanding, knowing what must be and what should not be. And we who made it up the scale of the ladder, up the heights that we climbed, we did it through nighttime reading, studying, practicing, and putting into action said policies made, making sure we understand what is done and recognizing that if we make a mistake, we'll be blamed for everything else rather than how can we correct this? So we had a burden to carry. We had a duty of care for ourselves and for those around us. And we had a duty of understanding the dynamics of group dynamics. What happens when somebody wants to make you a victim and you say, without saying the words, I don't think so. Yes, not this time. So, empowering people comes from within. They must want to do it. You can't force them. And they can't be lazy. If they have to read a chapter or paper before meeting, it isn't smart to pretend you did. You have to have done it. So there's something about honesty and the ability to show that you can be trusted to deliver. If you have to write that paper, write the paper. Don't be always looking for help. Dare to do it. Do it. Don't hope somebody will help you. You have to help yourselves.
Right. That's right. So thank you for that, Beverley. So we're now going to speak with our panel members.
Okay.
And so we're going to go back to the time of EDNA. So I'm going to start with Jacynth now. And each one will get the same question. So Jacynth, what were the key personal and professional challenges and the successes in establishing the Ethnic Diverse Nursing Association, EDNA, and that was in Birmingham. And in fact, it was the first network within the RCN Connect program. So a lot of the activities were a model because of the relationship working with Nola for the other regions. You're on mute.
Thanks for that question, Rudy, and hello again, everyone, and Rudy, for the opportunity to reflect. So what were the key personal and professional challenges? Well, back in 2001, when we began shaping what would become EDNA, I think we were navigating a landscape that was often silent around race. Conversations about any sort of, inequality, systemic inequality, never mind race, were absent. They were uncomfortable, and I think in many places unwelcome. It just wasn't on the agenda in many places. Personally, at that time, for me, as well as my colleagues, it was incredibly challenging. I had navigated and done all of the things and more that Nola had talked about. And I stepped into a senior nursing leadership position as an executive director of nursing and clinical practice, worked my way up with a seat at the board. But I was also carrying the weight of having to navigate microaggressions, the underrepresentation that existed, the constant need to almost prove your credibility, to prove your worth, to get beyond that notion of actually an individual being a token hire. Well, actually, the reality is nobody's a token hire. If you can't do the job, you're not getting the job. So, that was the reality. That was the reality. But also at the time, and I always have held on to a clear vision of what could be possible if we created something that was for us, by us. Yes, something like EDNA, which was bold, which was supportive, which was unapologetically focused on race and race equity. It was not diluted with other protected characteristics. We were very much unapologetic that this was about race. This was about addressing and supporting some of the key issues, some of the key challenges that people from Black and minority ethnic communities were facing. And yes, we're talking about nurses and the RCN nurses and midwives, but at the time when we were shaping and developing EDNA, we also included other staff from minority ethnic communities, people like Margaret Wellington, who give a shout out to, who is in finance. And I'm sure my colleague will mention some of the others, many of whom were nurses. So there was the challenge of building kind of the credibility, building the momentum in a system that didn't always see race as a priority. But I believe that our success in terms of EDNA came from that collective courage. It came from that collective struggle, that collective place, that collective notion of wanting to make a difference, not only to us as individuals, but actually in terms of nursing, which would then have an impact on patient care, because ultimately that's one of the reasons why we're there.
Yeah.
And so when I look back, I really recognize how much of a trailblazers we were. We drafted constitutions, we had a constitution, we had a clear terms of reference with aims and objectives rooted in justice, rooted in the issues that we were facing. And I'm not sure how much we realized we were actually trailblazers in terms of setting up and actually running a network for NHS staff from Black and minority ethnic groups. My recollection and kind of looking back, we designed mentoring structures. We were advocating for cultural safety at that time. We talk a lot about psychological safety now, but I think we were advocating for it at that time and really offering spaces targeted at newly qualified staff, again, supporting them and navigating them through professional routes, through channels such as RCN. And I think we built something that turned individual isolation into kind of this notion of like a group empowerment that was linked very closely. And I do believe that legacy still stands for all global majority staff, as we call them now. And that, and kind of, the real support through RCN Connect help us to achieve that.
Yeah, thanks for that.
In fact, very good.
Very good, Jacynth. Also, you mentioned a really important point. Because of EDNA, the whole term that we use system-wide going forward from that time is separate and complementary. So when we were talking about race, it wasn't instead of other things, because historically, when the focus was on race, then people will say, oh, what about all the other issues that need to be addressed? And of course, then race then was never addressed.
That's right.
And it was that learning from Edna's experience and us using the term separate and complementary. So they're not competing. Treat everyone with respect, of course. So a really important point. So Jennifer, same question to you.
Okay, thank you, Rudy. Goodness, 2001, I was a ward sister, as I recall, working really hard as a ward sister and knowing what the challenges were for ethnic minority staff. And so for me, the personal and professional challenges was that initially there wasn't a huge amount in terms of having a blueprint. The data was there, but it wasn't as prevalent as it is now. So I think a lot of what we did was out of necessity because we saw the harm, we saw the psychological harm. We did what we did without the resources. I think to some degree, it was a landscape, as Jacynth has said, that we were having to politically navigate, get round, get under, get over. And that was quite exhausting, really, when we think back, the toll that it probably took on us internally. There was a lack of trust. And so there was a huge amount of work that we had to do to build trust in and out. But I remember vividly when we had one of our network meetings, and clearly we were influencing, because I remember our director of strategy turned up at one of the events to listen, and he was listening and he was really hearing what we had to say. Because when I returned to work the following week, we had made an impact because they were talking about it in the upper echelons. They were talking about this group of BME staff. And I know we're talking about labels, and we've already mentioned BAME and BME, global majority. We are still hung up on some of that terminology, which we need to move away from. But what I remember personally was the synergy between us all and the support, the fact that, as Jacynth said, we came from different backgrounds. I remember we had Juliana Benjamin, for example, who came from an education background. She was a lecturer, so she brought the perspective of the students. We had Helen Daly, who was really instrumental, and her background was health visiting and mental health, so we had that influence as well. And social care, we had a nurse who had worked in the health service, who'd built a reputation for herself and was very instrumental in nursing homes, Doreen Osborne. And so we had that collective intelligence to do what we needed to do. So 2001, when I look back 25 years ago and think about what we did, and honestly, we're still doing it now, but working very strategically. I think back then we were doing a lot of work on the ground with the staff that were delivering direct care. And we were influencing at that level, but we were also influencing strategically as well with the constitutions and things that we drafted. And I remember when we went to Congress for the first time, for me, talking to 3,000 nurses about RCN Connect and receiving a rapturous round of applause, you just suddenly felt heard. And so I think when I look back, my goodness, we were trailblazers. We worked really hard. It was a difficult road that we trod and continue to do. So thank you for all of your support. I've learned from each and every one of you.
Thanks for that. Beverley.
Very good. Yes.
You're on mute.
Would like to move it forward a little bit. I acknowledge EDNA and the work that was done, and I did attend some of. I wasn't part of the initial organising group, as Jacynth talks about, but actually, you know, sitting there as a representative. I too, Jennifer was a senior ward sister around about that time, and some of the challenges I had at that time. Apart, you know, EDNA had been formed. The ability to use EDNA to enhance my professional development was very challenging. You know, it was balanced against time to be with patients and run a ward, and time and that notion that why do you need a group like EDNA? That's the bottom line. That's what was going on inside the NHS organisation. Why do you need a group like EDNA? If I fast forward more recently, because I work with continue to work with an NHS organisation, what we've got now, which is clearly a legacy from EDNA, I believe that is that there's an acceptance of having groups, you know, workforce groups specifically for Black, you know, I prefer the word Black and African Caribbean individuals. You know, that specifically now they can sit around the table, they can discuss the challenges that they have, they can discuss some of the inequalities. Yeah, well, you know, and so there is a progression. You know, in this reflective evening, I believe there's reflection, there's a progression, and I believe that EDNA, like we've used that word many times, was a trailblazer. It has morphed into what we see in many NHS organisations now.
Yeah, thanks for that, Beverley. The important thing for me at the time when improving working lives was around, it specifically mentioned about BME staff networks. So that was an important intervention from RCN and focusing on representation and voices heard. So many networks that were established during that time were based on the EDNA model.
Yeah,
it's because most of the other trusts, they were just getting them up and running, or the staff had been battling to get them up and running in the first place. And at the time, because again, RCN as an institution, as it was quite a powerful institution, as you know, in those days, especially at the workforce level. So yeah, so EDNA, many networks are built up on that. Communities of practice, EDNA did it. And if you remember, we had a conference, I think it's just outside Tyler, no, where was it? I can't remember now. But and the Gisela Stewart, who was a minister at the time. Giselle. Gisela Stewart. Yeah, she was a minister, and she actually came to that conference on the Saturday. Again, that just showed, and that was the junior minister, John Denham originally. So you remember John Denham when he was a health minister?
Absolutely, yeah.
He recognised RCN Connect, and that shook up the higher echelons of the RCN at the time. The fact the minister had said, yes, this is actually a good initiative. Yeah. So there's still more to be told about that history.
Absolutely.
And it should receive its place in the annals of progression.
Absolutely. Foundation. It laid a foundation on which so much more has been built.
It did.
But if it lit the way, it needs to be recognized that somebody put resources in that organization to help clarify and move forward, and the benefits that came from it.
Absolutely. I'm now going to go back round the panel. We've kind of touched on some of the memories of RCN Connect, so we don't really need to go so much into that and its impact. But Beverley, I'm going to come to you and go around the other way this time. In your opinion, what's been the most effective equality policy for workforce development and leadership progression? And I'm asking you this now in the context of the experience you've already had with EDNA. So we're talking about beyond that now, 5, 7, 8, 10 years beyond that.
You know what, Rudy, for me and where I'm positioned in the work that I do, I have to say it's the Equalities Act. I think that much has happened. We can dissect the Equalities Act, but much of what certainly Jacynth and I we worked together in the early 2010. That work progressively, there is a progression, and I think for me that the Equalities Act, the NHS plan also, if I may, around I talk about it to this day because I see that as a trajectory. I see that as the umbrella that everything else that has happened in the aspects of inequalities and improving inequality stems from that original policy paper. You can look back over the NHS plan, the 10-year plan, and you will still see and recognise some aspects of that policy back then.
Thanks for that. And that's such a good point, because I think around that time was the Race Equality Amendment Act as well. And it wasn't unfair to assist people who historically have been underserved or underrepresented. So, yeah. So Lord Herman Ouseley, the late Lord Ouseley, was very strong and really determined on that as well. So we must mention it. Jennifer.
I absolutely agree with the Equalities Act, NHS Workforce Plan, because we then started to really focus on training and retaining. And then, we were then looking at who was staying, who was leaving, why people were leaving. So I think the workforce plan has been significant. I think also when we think about some of these subsections of the data that's collected, when I look at the staff survey, that gets so much energy. And I think that's really quite key today. The effort that organisations, our execs put into getting a good staff survey is incredible. Because why? Because there are KPIs against it. Why? Because there's almost competition. It's published. And so I think the NHS staff survey is significant. And I think clearly when we look at, again, the sub policies, look at workforce race equality standard and workforce disability standard, because again, we've got data that makes it clear that our people are not treated equally. And then we can use that data, and we know that if people don't feel well, they're not treated well, then we know there's a direct impact on patient care. There is enough research that tells us if our staff are not happy, then our patients are not happy. So I think for me, Equalities Act, Workforce Plan, and then the staff survey and the res of what has absolutely shifted some of the work that we now do around positive action, which I think people now realise is absolutely necessary.
Yeah, great point. Great point. Because it reminds me, as it relates to the staff survey, and we used to say to people, always fill them in because it provides us with a paper trail when we're doing service examinations. So, and then also res was, I think, a great policy. We called it accountability by data. Good point.
Yes.
So I'm going to come to Jacynth, and then Nola will just round off this section. So Jacynth, your perspective.
Yeah, so There's been a plethora, we know, national policies, initiatives, each of them signalling and wanting, a desire for progress. And we heard earlier Nola mention a few: improving working lives, positively diverse, breaking through, Beacon Leadership Programme. And interestingly, I absolutely agree with Nola in terms of the breaking through, because one has to question and argue whether they built, designed, and developed from a deficit perspective or from an asset base. But I think wherever they came from, both of those programs. So when I think about Breaking Through, which is the Leadership Academy, when I think about the work of Dame Nessun Watson-Drury in terms of the Beacon Leadership Programme, then I think they've both had incredibly positive outcomes and have produced chief nurses, chief operating officers, chief executives over a period of time. A number of these senior leaders will have been through one or other or both of these programs. So there is something about a program that is, okay, we have to think about the inception of the inception of the program, but actually the design, build, and development was by individuals who look like us, who understood the nuances of leadership. And these are the nuances that can't be found in any leadership manual or any leadership textbook. So they were pioneering of this time. I think there are two initiatives that stand out. The first, the other one I wanted to kind of mention was Sir Nigel Crisp's 10-point race equality plan, which was around 2004, because I think that was incredibly bold. He was really bold. It focused on improving, it focused on improving services for minority ethnic communities and for improving the development and experiences of Black minority ethnic staff. And I think what was particularly powerful, my memories, I really remember this, was that Sir Nigel called directly for NHS chief executives to mentor individuals from Black minority ethnic communities to tackle the underrepresentation. I think what is perhaps a little sad is that there was no review, I'm trying to think of the actual, no evaluation really to kind of understand what the impact of that was. But nonetheless, I think that was really bold of him to do and demonstrated what we really, really need in this field, was that visible and audible leadership in this space. So I think we have to applaud him for that. And I suppose there are lots of others, and Jennifer's made mention of the WRES, the Workforce Race Equality Standard. Now, this is built on a lot of the other policy initiatives. So this isn't a standalone. This has been built on the policy initiatives. It was Simon Stevens, the chief executive at that time, but built on data and anecdotal data. I don't think we can ever underestimate the power of stories. The power of stories that are really, really important, and we were able to tell those stories and share those stories through RCN Connect, through the networks that came through a lot of the work, that Jennifer did, and positively, and you'll have to remind me, positively.
Getting on against the odds.
Getting on against the odds. I'm so sorry. Through that work. So it's important that we have the data. That's really important, and that we have the accountability, such as was started by Sir Nigel Crisp. That's really important. And for the first time, organisations are being held accountable. So we've told stories, we've given them the data, we've built networks where they are getting first-hand data from their staff. But actually now we've got some of the evidence-based, the hard facts, which is really, really important. And I think the truth is it's been incremental. Some would argue that it's not been fast enough. We've got practically a quarter, if not more, of our workforce now from, that's why we use the term now, global majority. And in places like London, like the West Midlands, they are the global majority. Still lots of work to do, but we've got solid foundations, is what I'd like to say. We've got some solid foundations on which to build.
Thanks for that. And yeah, I remember at the time, actually going back to the res first, we must recognize the role of Roger Klein.
And Yvonne Coghill.
Yvonne Coghill, yes.
Yeah. When it came to the res, yeah. So I think they were part of the same team for a while as well, weren't they?
Yeah.
Yes.
Linked to the Leadership Academy. And the other thing, I think, Jacynth, you mentioned about Nigel Crisp's 10-point plan. To us, that was quite important because we used to use a term that the barriers are carefully constructed and protected.
Yeah, I remember that.
Absolutely. That's systemic racism.
Right. Over to you, Nola. If you
nobody likes to name it.
No. That was wonderful.
Yeah.
That was truly, truly inspiring. And it served as a bridge from then, the 2000s, right across the 2 decades of where race and BME policies have got to. Each one of you gave a great, I suppose, glimpse of how the NHS is moving towards, dare I say that, a better employer status. It didn't start out as that. It had its moments, and it still has its moments. A good example is some senior nurses are still being harassed. But overall, the picture is encouraging. If all that can happen in 25 years with all of you, 3 of you, who is taking over? To whom are you passing the baton? Who are you mentoring? In 20 years, 25 years' time, when somebody sits next to my tombstone, who are you going to tell? You're going to tell Nola, guess what? We've got a black CNO. Don't forget. At long last. You understand? Times have changed, and racism is a thing of the past. Because our generation don't see skin, they see integrity, they see intelligence, they see the individual, and more importantly, they don't care what color you are. They don't judge you for that. But hearing the 3 of you talk about where we're going and how it happened and the various policies that supported and the legislation that underpinned most of the policies, it's encouraging. In fact, it makes an old veteran proud of you 3. So proud. And this look back on RCN Connect should be a model for other things. It should be. It's a blessing that we are acknowledging. We didn't have much to start with, but boy, have we come a long way. Yeah. We use our talents. We use our skills. We help others develop theirs. And 25 years on, it doesn't hurt so much. Really look at it with pride. And I am so proud of the 3 of you. I feel that you're one of my kids. All of you, you've come such a long way. And the authoritative element of your presentations and your answers and the strength and knowledge. Oh boy, they don't pay us enough.
That's true.
You're good. You're good at what you do. I'm a proud woman here listening and watching. And as for RCN Connect, the RCN is invited to listen again. And do RCN Connect too.
Absolutely. So we're now at our final question, and I'm going to begin with Jennifer on this one.
Okay.
And the underlining of this question is about our collective responsibility. Mm-hmm. So the focus of this question is on us. We've been talking about everybody else. We're now talking about ourselves. So Jennifer, as we reflect on 25 years, what are the key lessons from its contributions, and how can its impact be sustained and adapted for future workforce challenges in nursing and the broader health and social care system?
Okay, thank you, Rudy. So, key lessons as we reflect. So, keep doing what we've been doing is clear for me. I think we have to continue with our networks. We have to build that movement. I think it's absolutely clear that that synergy continues, and we position ourselves so that we are able to influence policy. I think we now have organisations like the Nola Ishmael Chief Nursing Officer group, and we have other powerful networks like Amari, Jabali, etc. And I think it's really important to be aligned with those networks so that that information, the stories, Jacynth mentioned stories are powerful. Behind every single data is somebody's story. So I think it's really important to make sure that those stories are fed up through the networks to those who have the ear of the chief nursing officers, of the MPs, etc. And, you know, it's not as difficult anymore. I've been sat in a room with various ministers over the past 10 years talking about aspirations of NHS BME staff, talking about the inequalities. And so I think a lot of us have a room at the table now, that we have a seat at the table. I think it's really important to share what we learn, continue to lift as we climb. I think they are some of the key lessons, but reading, understanding the policies is, you know, so important so that you can position yourself strategically to make a difference. I think if you work in an organisation and you don't understand the strategic direction of the organisation, you don't understand its ambition, you don't understand its mission or its vision, then you can't make a difference. You're just working hard and not smart. So I think there's some of the key lessons. In terms of sustainability, it's all of the above, really. It's making sure that our voices are heard, we are empowered, and I think just making sure that we are involved in all of the key decisions that are being discussed, making sure that we are involved, don't sit in the background.
Okay, thank you. Jacynth, you're on mute.
Apologies, mute is such a wonderful thing. So I think one of the clearest lessons from both EDNA and RCN Connect, Connect's legacy, is that change is never the work of one voice. It's a collective. It's always a collective. and talked about earlier about being bold and courageous. I think that EDNA was never just about advocacy, it was about agency. Yes, it was, and how we use that agency to reclaim the space for us, for people that look like us. And I really believe it's not about people from Black and minority ethnic staff needing to be empowered. I believe we already have power. Yes, when we look back in history, and I believe we already have power. The real work is about creating conditions where actually that power can be fully expressed and can be fully recognized. I think we think about our collective responsibility today is to continue to create those conditions, actively and passively, where that agency can be recognized, where people are actively empowered. So that means refusing to treat race equity as a side project. We've got the Equalities Act, we have things like the RES, which is mandated in all NHS organisations. This isn't a nice to. It really is about building systems where inclusion is not dependent on who's in the room. So it's not reliant on people like us being in the room, but it's embedded in the culture where it's began to become normal, the conversations are normalized, and that we move beyond this performative allyship, really. I'm kind of tired of people pitching up at a meeting and saying they're an ally, but actually doing nothing. So we need to move beyond that notion of performative allyship towards more of a actionable accountability. I think Nola knows exactly what I mean from that laugh.
Like business as usual.
Virtue signaling. Virtue signaling.
I think we need business as unusual rather than business as usual. And I really believe we have to normalize the discomfort, because it's in that discomfort where growth happens. It's in that discomfort when leaders sit in their difficult truth. They have two choices. They act or they don't act. And there are consequences to both. So I think we've really got to normalize the discomfort and not make excuses for it.
Yeah.
I think my belief that representation alone is not transformation. We need more than representation. We need presence with influence at all levels. So it's more, what I'm saying is it's more than numbers. That policy without any ownership is, again, kind of a bit of a waste of time. It's a nice thing to do, but if there's nobody willing to take the policy forward, then again, it's not worth the paper. I think we have to recognize, not so much us within here, but there has to be a recognition along with that normalizing discomfort that silence is complicity. That if you're silent, you're complicit within this. Yes. So going back to the fact that we do have an Equalities Act 2010, and if you are silent about what the Act is asking you to do, then actually not only are you being complicit, actually we're acting against the law. So I think sustainability is about three things. There's something about legacy stewardship, not nostalgia. Yes, we absolutely have to recognize and own and honor the past, not just by preserving it, but by building on it. Yes, standing on the shoulders of giants, building on what has been. So we need to acknowledge it and not stay there. Nola, there was a saying that you always said that I always remember, that we have to move from they did me wrong. We have to move from that, acknowledge they did us wrong, but we have to build on what needs to happen.
What did you learn?
Two other things very quickly. And again, Noel alluded to this, that notion around intergenerational leadership. So we must equip and entrust and trust the next generation to innovate. They will do things to us, and that's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. There are things that they can learn from us, things that we can learn from them, and we need to walk alongside each other. And then I think there's something about structural embedding. So how we embed it into the structures, integrate it, how leaders are developed, how workforces are planned, accountability frameworks are designed, not just referenced in the equity statements, in these anti-racist statements that organizations are wonderfully putting out there, but really embedding it. And finally, sustainability requires hope, not the soft kind, but that real radical hope that says we believe in better, we are prepared to do the work to make it real.
Thanks for that, Jacynth. So I'm going to come to Beverley now, but Beverley knows me, so I'll just add an extra dimension that I would like Beverley to touch on. The importance, Beverley, of the mental health review recommendations.
Yeah. So Rudy knows me well as well. You know, where I'm at is really around mental health patients and support for communities. I listened to Jacynth carefully. I agree with everything you've said, Jacynth, but I'd also like to see on that journey that we are working to build our communities. Nola's talked about legacy. The legacy's got to come from our community. Our community will enter nursing, yeah? So there's some work for us to do out here in the community, you know, around, you know, the resilience of our people in order so that they can enter the profession. They are entering the profession, but not necessarily being able, equipped and enabled enough to stay for the journey, yeah? So for me, the importance of mental health in you know, in terms of how the nurse, the older nurse, the younger nurse deals with the pushbacks that they're going to get. We're not out of that space yet. They're still going to get the pushbacks around their culture, their colour, whatever it may be. But we have to be a resilient people. And to do that, we have to have good mental health. So for me, you know, I tend three areas. Well, there's four. It's still urgent that we move forward. Yes, we've had 25 years, and yeah, what a wonderful progression. It's been a privilege to listen and have the opportunity to reflect. But we've actually got to listen more than, harder than we've ever done before. Yeah, more than, harder than we've ever done before. We've actually got to start acting. So when we listen, we act. Yeah. And I know that Nola has talked about this in previous conversations. Yeah. Where is that action plan? Yeah. where I'm pointing you, Nola. Where I heard you.
Yes. Yeah.
And in terms of the mental health work that I'm interested in, where is it? And who do I hold? Who do we hold to account? I hear that professionals, you know, CEOs, others have been held to account, but I'd like to see the community actively involved in holding to account. So for me, the future is community assemblies, community stakeholder groups that are feeding information in and out of health. Yeah. And real-time change where it's needed, not having to run through a complaints process.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay.
Real-time change. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Beverley. Yeah. And it always brings to mind what we used to say, what is sometimes articulated in public is fiercely resisted in private.
Absolutely.
So Nola.
Yes.
We're coming to you now.
Okay.
For you to give the final passing the baton message. So these three young women here.
Yes.
You need to place that baton firmly in their hand.
I think we can. I think we must. But they have a job. They need to take this and move it on to the next generation. We're looking at intergenerational service that has gone on for the last quarter of a century. what's going to happen going forward? Who has the air of the present Chief Nursing Officer? And what have you charged him with? What were the first 3 things in terms of leadership you expected from him, and did you get it? Does he know you're asking? I did mention it to him in a tweet. We're expecting different, better, and further. Staff needs to be able to be safely positioned in the sure knowledge that there will be somebody listening and some action will follow. I hear what Bev and Jacynth are saying. This allyship terminology, where's the action?
Where's the action? Mm.
What follows just saying, I agree with you? End of. How do we go forward? And the National Health Service, will it always be the National Health Service? And is anybody prepared that there may be a change and somebody may ask you to pay a bit more?
Mm-hmm.
And for our patients, do they have happy stories, happier stories? If we were to collect the stories of the last 25 years, will there be improvement in the next 25 years? Furthermore, organizations, let's turn our attention to our professional organizations. How are they leading? What are they supporting? Who are they moving forward? And is it always have to be a contention and a breakdown service before something better comes along? Why can't they do it for the just because? And the Department of Health, now that they've now got the reins back in delivering service, what's their new plan? You ask about the plan, where they're going from here. What's the new NHS plan and when does it come into force? And how long will it take to become normal? I don't know if words are the tools anymore. I think action must be the tool.
Yeah.
Absolutely, Nola. Because in fact, what you've done, I believe, has taken us right back in a circle.
Yes.
Because 25 years ago, when I first walked into the RCN, it was read the policies, observe the actions, apply the remedies. And that's exactly what you said, where we are again.
Yeah, yes. The generation that's born in the 80s, who are now being the new voters and the new, that generation that born since 2000, they're now 25 years old. Good Lord, I can't believe that. They were just babies. And now they're moving forward. And somebody better look at who they're recruiting as nurses now. And include the education of nurses in our discussion.
Absolutely.
A newly qualified nurse, how are they different, their skills and their practice from the nurse of, I don't know, 30 years ago? So there's changes are happening, but we need to look at how it impacts impacts on us and patients? And does it improve our situations? Whether I'm a patient or a professional, how does it impact?
Right.
And who's writing the books?
Absolutely.
Who's writing?
As always.
Yeah.
Right. So I was going to end with that passing the baton message from Nola, but I thought how we should end, each of our 3 panel members, I just want one word from you as it relates to Nola, and then we will close for the evening.
Sorry, just repeat that. One word.
One word
I
as
need a
it
drink.
relates to Nola. Then we close. Jacynth, I'll start with you.
Trailblazer.
Trailblazer.
Oh,
Okay. Beverley.
I'm going to pause for a minute. I think the boldness for me.
Boldness.
Boldness. The boldness.
Boldness.
Bold.
oh, bless you.
Trailblazer. Boldness. Jennifer.
Legend.
Legend. Trailblazer. Boldness. Legend. You're not allowed to speak, Nola. So
Okay.
those 3 words. So you will see those 3 words appear for the next 25 years. Trailblazer, boldness, legend. And legend relates to legacy.
Yeah.
It wasn't just invented today. Look back. So excellent. So thank you very much all.
Oh, thank you.
A great session. A little bit longer than we planned. But the value's been great, and it will be shared everywhere, rebroadcast on the radio stations, and fantastic. Thank you.
Wow.
And good night.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Great to see you.
Good to see you all.
Take care, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Stay fabulous.